Thank you very much, Zin. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a real privilege to be able to introduce tonight's first speaker. Professor Gunalan Nadarajan is a member of the Art Science Museum's International Advisory Board, and in that capacity has provided the museum with a huge amount of passion, encouragement, and advice over the years. And it's always a real pleasure to have him back in Singapore. He's very well known, of course, to the arts and education sector in Singapore. He served as the Dean of Visual Arts at LaSalle College of the Arts here for many years and has made numerous major contributions to Singapore's arts ecology. As Zin shared, he's now the Dean of the Penny Stamp School of Art and Design at the University of Michigan. He's an art theorist and a curator who works at the intersection of art and science. He's been actively engaged in artistic, curatorial, research and policy work, which looks at how we can better integrate art and science for over 2 decades. As well as the post that he holds now, in the past he's held the position of Vice Provost for Research at the Maryland Institute and College of the Arts, and he's held senior positions at the College of Arts and Architecture at Penn State University. As Zin has shared tonight, he's going to be talking about some very important research which he co-authored in the States, which has very deep relevance and resonance for us here in Singapore. Branches from the Same Tree is a report commissioned by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, which addresses a topic that's very dear to our heart here at Art Science Museum, which is the importance of interdisciplinary approaches to learning. The landmark report shows that education that bridges knowledges and modes of inquiry from multiple disciplines, the arts, humanities, engineering, technology, medicine, mathematics, is going to better prepare students for life, work, and citizenship. Guna is one of the authors of the report, and I'm extremely kind of humbled and delighted that he's agreed to share its findings with all of us tonight. So to begin our program, please welcome to the stage, Guna.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much, and it's always nice to be back in Singapore, and this museum is such an incredible resource for the country, and it's a great place to share the findings of this report. I thought I'll try and give you some initial context to the report itself so that you would understand some of the rationale and some of the findings in that context. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine is a kind of a very important think tank in the United States. It's a very old organization, 150 or so years. It's primarily focused on looking forward, looking ahead multiple years. Very often they are looking at issues and concerns that are going to be important for people in the sciences, people in technology to be aware about. So for example, 30 years ago, they launched the first report. They wrote the first report on nanotechnology. And you can see that they were looking ahead and looking not only at the technology, but also looking at the moral, ethical implications of the materials and the environmental implications of those materials. Roughly, the National Academies generates about 150 to 170 or so reports a year. And this is one of those reports. So that's the National Academies. So what is the report about? Why the report at all? So there are many other contexts, and I'll talk about it a bit, still a bit odd. The big challenge that they were facing was they were continuously hearing from employers and from thought leaders in education they were hearing from industry leaders, and they were all saying the same thing to them, to the people in the national academies, that higher education is not creating or producing the kinds of graduates that they can easily deploy in the different industries that they are working in. And so the National Academies has a board of higher education and workforce development, and that is the body that was initially tasked to think about the problem of, is there something we could be doing in higher education in terms of broad changes that are needed that would better prepare the students for the jobs and the opportunities of the future. And one of the things that they suspected that they needed to do, and this was coming through from the discussions they were having with employers, is that many of the employers were basically saying the kinds of education that you are giving in the universities are very siloed and discipline specific, and they are not providing them with the kind of broader perspective and understanding of the bigger complex social problems and political problems and economic and material problems that anyone needs to deal with in the future. So they basically felt that the academies felt that perhaps one of the premises of the report could be that there are some aspects of integrative education where integrating arts, humanities, and the sciences is actually going to produce better graduates who are better prepared for the world out there, the world still to come. So that's the initial context to it. I'll give you some specific context. A very important part of the context within which the report had to be developed was the changing future of work. So in 2016, the World Economic Forum, which regularly has this Future of Jobs report, it presented one of its findings was that 65% of students who are entering primary school do not yet know of what kinds of jobs that will be out there. The jobs do not actually exist, right? So when they graduate, those entering in 2016 into primary school, the jobs that they will occupy, 65% of them, the jobs don't exist yet. The same World Economic Forum has also made some interesting predictions about the future of work. There is an important statistic about what they call the global average of skill stability. So this is the stability of skills required in any particular industry. They found that in 12 major industries, the skills that are required are likely to change. Just between 2018 and 2022, they are likely to change by about 42%, meaning 58% only of the jobs out there, the skills required for certain jobs in 12 industries are going to be remaining stable. Everything else, 42%, is going to be changing in just a matter of 4 to 5 years. They also have some interesting statistics on the kind of division of labor between humans and machines. In 2018, they found that 71% of the total number of hours in 12 industries, the tasks involved in 12 industries were done by humans and 29% by machines. Now, they predict that by 2022, this will be flipped to 56% by humans and 44% by machines. Now, this is just in a space of 4 to 5 years, and that shows the rapidity of change in the work environment. Artificial intelligence, automation, and a whole range of things are going to change the way work is. What this does is that it sets a certain amount of unpredictability to what's going on out there. What are the directions that could be taken, in job market? Even in Singapore, the YouGov survey very recently in October found that 50% only of graduates are actually working, when they are graduating, they are working in a sector that is related to what they study. Now, we need to ask ourselves, if we are training our students in all these important things, why is it that 50% of them are actually working in another field? Why is it that they are working in another field despite of what they learned in school? Now, it's a rallying call for us to either say, well, we throw our hands up and surrender and say, well, look, there's a 50% chance that what you are studying is going to be relevant for you out there. So why would 50% of you need not be here. 50% of what we are teaching need not be taught. So we need to ask ourselves, how does education change? But it also represents opportunities. Education, if it does the right kinds of changes, it allows us to better prepare our students. Higher education is also changing. The value of higher education is increasingly being questioned. People are asking, so why is it that we spend so much and go and get an education and we don't necessarily translate to work? There are also big questions about disciplinary education. Everywhere you turn, universities are talking about the importance of interdisciplinary programs. But alongside that, there is also a tendency to hyper-specialization, because every field has become so complicated in terms of the new content and the new research and discoveries that are being made. There is a constant need to specialize and learn more and go deeper into every discipline that is out there. So simultaneously, we have two pressures. One, to hyper-specialize, another to say, well, look, hyper-specialization is not going to be helpful because we need to have a broader perspective. So how do these things still sit together? And then, of course, at the end of the day, what we do, what we train our students to do is to, at the end of the day, help them to prepare better for the challenges out there. The challenges out there are very different. They are complex, and complex problems require complex solutions. And complex solutions don't come from single disciplines. So this is the larger context within which the report was written. So before I talk about the findings, the report itself they recruited 22 people from across the United States, from a variety of fields, from smaller liberal arts colleges as well as large research universities, private universities as well as public universities. We had quite a number of employers, industry leaders, as well as policymakers. The 22 of us spent about 2 years, from 2016 to 2018, meeting every month, either in Washington, D.C., or somewhere else in the United States, where we were going out on fact-finding mission. We went to Silicon Valley, we went to universities in the Boston area, looking at Harvard and MIT, and looking at smaller universities, large universities, Arizona State. So we essentially we went all across the country, looked at universities, talked to administrators, talked to faculty, talked to students, and we tried to understand what the challenges were that they were facing, and tried to understand what was working and what was not working. Based on the findings that we had, as well as we commissioned 2 studies. One was a literature review. We tried to understand what was the evidence out there on the value of integrative education per se. Is integrating different subjects, different disciplines valuable per se? And then we also wanted to know, is integrating arts and humanities with STEM disciplines valuable? So we had 2 studies that were commissioned, and these studies were very extensive ones, done by experts, and those findings were also fed into our process. So based on all of those information, the fact-finding, our discussions, and the evidence that we got from those studies, we developed our report. We found certain things. This is one slide that captures all the major findings, and I'll go through this somewhat quickly. So we saw that whenever there was integrative education between arts and humanities and STEM disciplines, these things were continuously showing up as regular correlations. So one, we found that
students who were going through those kinds of programs had improved written and oral communication skills. They were better able to communicate what they were doing. They were able to do that both verbally and as well as in written form. They had tremendous amount of teamwork skills. This was continuously showing up. They were better able to collaborate because they were able to empathize with, connect with, translate into someone else's ideas. This was, again, a big finding for us. We did not expect this, but we found that they were better at ethical decision making. They were more grounded, they understood what was right and wrong, and they could manage and navigate it better. They had better critical thinking and deeper learning abilities. They had better content mastery. This is very interesting. I want to repeat this. This is about people who are studying between disciplines. They actually had better content mastery in those specific disciplines that were integrated than students who were studying it just by itself. So let me clarify that. You are just studying only art and you are only studying math, let's say, and we found that students who were studying math and art together were learning art and math better than those students who were only studying art and so only studying math. Now that's an important finding because, we have commissioned another study that is going to go deeper into this because this is a really important finding for us. The students were enjoying learning. This was again, this was much significant difference from students who were regularly learning from just one discipline. They were better engaged and they were enjoying the learning experience. They showed better empathy and resilience. So they were better able to empathize with someone else's ideas and situation. Their ideas, when they formed, were much more resilient. They had an ability to apply knowledge in real-world settings. They were really able to map whatever they were learning and very quickly map it onto the kinds of real-world situations that they were likely to face or they were facing. And they had, across the board, especially people in the sciences, they had better science literacy. So the students who were learning science actually had better science literacy as a result of this integrative learning. Now, we also found that there was an interesting comparison between what we were finding and what employers and employer surveys were showing up consistently. Employer surveys were consistently showing that they wanted well-rounded individuals with a holistic education who can take on complex problems and understand the needs, desires, and motivations of others, qualities that we think match and we found match benefits of integrative education. Now, so we had those findings and we also realized that, yeah, it's not enough just to have those findings and stop there. We also wanted to make some recommendations because throughout the time that we were doing these fact-finding missions, we discovered that there were lots of challenges to integrative education because institutions are far more clunkier and more difficult to change than our desires to make them change. So what are the challenges to integrative education? At the most basic level, and I would say this is one of the big challenges, is university structures of disciplines and departments and colleges. So departments are still siloed. They are basically biology department, philosophy department, anthropology department. And these departments have particular budgets associated with them, particular ways in which they are accredited, particular institutional histories and professional expectations that they have to meet. Then there was the professional expectations of disciplines, evaluation. How do we evaluate someone who is doing something between science and math? So one of the things that we found, and Jeannette told me that it's a Yale program, where students were learning physics through dance, and two professors, a professor of dance and a professor of physics, were working together in getting students to learn physics. Now so how do you evaluate the student? For the dance that they produced, or for the math for the physics that they are doing? Is there a third category of evaluation that we need to develop? And if we do, then how do we develop those? And how quickly can we develop those? tenure and promotion. Recognition of faculty and people who are teaching in particular fields are still very restricted to what they do in those fields. If you are a professor of art, then show me what you do in art. Yes, I know that you did something like an exhibition with a scientist, but it doesn't sound like art. So it makes it far more difficult for many of them to take those risks, especially if they are junior. Accreditation standards, of course, they are continuously, accreditation standards, ironically, are becoming more and more stringent. They are requiring you to meet particular requirements in the program rather than outside the program. They are restricting many of the disciplines we found were actually restricting the number of electives. Electives are where you get out of your discipline, and very often they were restricting the electives, and this was a national trend we saw in the US. I do not know how it is here. So these are big challenges. Student expectations. Students are still in a kind of a disciplinary hangover. Like if you ask them, you say, what do you want to do? I want to be a graphic designer. And that's all they know. They just have made up their mind that that's what they need to do. But they don't realize that a graphic designer today is expected to do a whole lot of things outside of graphic design per se. They have to understand clients, and clients might not be from the design field or understand the design in the same way. They might be better able to deal with health communication challenges if they understood health field better. But we are not doing that right now, and the students are not even thinking about it because they are still saying, I want to go to this particular program. So they feed into the disciplinary mentality. And they have conventional career ambitions. Employers, they are adding to the confusion. Whenever you talk to employers, and sometimes the same employers at different times, they are saying different things. At one time they will say, we are interested in broad-minded people who are really, very critical thinkers. They are really looking at everything broadly. And then they will say, we need someone who is going to be coming in and starting immediately, and we want them to work on this, and this, and we need them to know those things very well, right? So there is this idea that there are some specific skill sets we need them to have, but we also want them to be beyond those skill sets and be more broad-minded. And you can have both, right? And it's, I talk about it as specialists and generalists, please, because as if we can create them easily. And then there is a bigger danger, and this is something that we heard from faculty and from students and from administrators, especially in arts and humanities. They were afraid that, this is a one-sided thing, where arts and humanities is in the service of the sciences. So where the idea is that economically, in terms of the economy, STEM disciplines are important. Arts and humanities are going to help STEM disciplines be better understood and developed in schools, and therefore the economy will benefit from it. So the arts and humanities are being instrumentalized in some ways, and that was not what the report was trying to do. The report was really basically saying it needs to be a two-way street. We actually found that there was less examples of integration of sciences into the arts and humanities than there was the other way around. And so it's important to be cautious that you don't want to become instrumentalized, artists and humanists, but we also need to keep ourselves open to other disciplines that are coming from outside. And then there's the bigger question of what is higher education for? All this talk about jobs sometimes distorts the real facts, which is higher education about upliftment of who you are as a person, making you a better person, better prepared for the future, no matter what that future is and what the specific job you are undertaking? Or is it simply about preparing you for the job market out there? I would like to think, and a lot of us believed very sincerely, that higher education is much more than that. Higher education should be much more than that. And while we acknowledge that this kind of integration is good for job success, and we see some connections to how employers perceive their success, we do not want to reduce it to that. and that's an important a challenge for us as we move forward. So, I've done similar kinds of talk, and so going back very quickly to the report itself, when we did the report, unlike other reports the National Academy does, the National Academy's reports are usually about 150 or 170, right? They develop those reports and it gathers dust in their library. They don't usually circulate it except through PDFs online. Anyone can download the PDF of this report if you want. And it is the most downloaded report in the history of National Academies. The National Academies, for this particular report, took a very different stand. They decided that they wanted to disseminate this more widely. That's why we have, over the last year or so, had many town halls where we go to different universities and talk to faculty, students, about the report itself, what we found, and then have engaged university leaders and students and faculty in discussions about what are they doing right now and what could they be doing. So if you did not guess it already, this is one of those kinds of town halls. And I've done similar kinds of report summaries in many countries, in China, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in Austria, and most recently in Australia. And I can tell you that people's ideas about how much change needs to happen in their own institutions or in their own countries is slightly different, but they all agree very broadly that some things need to change. Now, this is just me. This is me feeling very frustrated that over 20-something years, being in education, I'm almost 30 years. I know that I look like a baby, but I am pretty old. So almost 30 years of being in higher education, I feel frustrated that there are real possibilities for us to enhance the education of the next generation. And I've heard many people talk about the need for some change for a long time. And I think that we need the change to be radical, meaning from the ground up, and fundamental. It needs to be broad. It needs to be across many parts of the institution, not just one part of the institution. And it needs to be rapid, quick, because I think that the future is catching up on us, and we need to be better prepared for it. I'm not talking about better prepared for the jobs of the future, but better prepared for the future. And I think it comes from us having a broader vision about what it is to be educated, what it is to be knowledgeable, and ready to engage the future. So thank you very much. So I get to ask some questions now. Maybe I'll start with you, Jeannette, but what I thought would be useful is for us to find out about what you are each doing in your own institutions, or what you know of in your own institutions where some of this integration is already happening, and what was the motivation for that kind of integration in the first place, and how is it working? What are some things you are learning from that? Maybe Jeannette, you could start. And
it's about 27 questions all at once. I'm going to talk about two hats that I have worn or wear. I'll just talk briefly about my time at Yale University, and then I really want to focus on Yale-NUS College here in Singapore. So like you, Guna, I've actually been in higher education for 30 years. This year is 30 years. And I've been at Yale in multiple departments. My own work is really, I would say, characterized by an interdisciplinary practice. Mm-hmm. As was mentioned, my primary appointment is in public health, and which sits at Yale within a school of medicine. And so I want to just to take two examples, but one here is to talk about how science and arts are integrated there we have one of the older, not the oldest was actually at Penn State, you may know that. The first Humanities and Medicine program was at Penn State in the 1960s. Yale founded its program in the 80s, so about 20, maybe 20 years after. And when we think about arts into medicine, some of the findings that you described from the report, and I heard sort of oohs and ahs behind us about better learning, more ethical decision making, better communication skills. Imagine being a medical student, a resident physician, or a patient or family member of a loved one, where a physician who also is trained in the arts and humanities has better diagnostic skills because they're more observant to the pallor of the skin, or the swelling or contraction of an organ or whatever. So we actually see that arts, this kind of co-education in arts and science, and you're right, it's arts integrated into the science bit, does result in better outcomes. And I was involved, as I shared with you over dinner, at then a series of events over the last decade or so, where had the pleasure and privilege of curating a museum exhibition where we're talking about science education, particularly around obesity and chronic disease at the Peabody Museum of Natural History, and then using the arts to really bring science to the public. And then also some work in the theater, where again we used theater as a mechanism for expressing, really human vulnerability and some difficult issues, mental health, mental illness, how to cope with life and death circumstances. So that's sort of a Yale bit, and really thinking about the importance within medical education and public health. I do want to turn to Yale-NUS College, and I'll try to keep it brief before we turn to Venka, because we'll come back to this again. Here is the dean of at Yale-NUS College, a college of liberal arts and sciences in Singapore. I've been here for 2.5 years, and I've been dean about 1.5 years, or going on 1.5 years. The whole college was founded on the principle of the integration of the humanities, sciences, and social sciences. And so liberal arts education, by its very definition, does the things that you're talking about. And we're a purely undergraduate institution founded in partnership by Yale and National University of Singapore. And our mission statement is community of learning founded by 2 great universities in Asia for the world. And we like to say that rather than this specialization, that really what we are about is broad-based education, better critical thinking, how to write, how to think. And because of the very, 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 very rapid technological changes, as you say, what we're learning today, what we're teaching today in content areas will be obsolete, days, weeks, months, or if not obsolete, foundation of deeper learning and changes. So we think we're training the next generation of leaders in many fields by providing this kind of broad-based education. And I'd love to talk more about that as we go through.
Good. Venka?
Thank you. Thank you, Honor and Art Science Museum, for having me here, and to be on the same platform with Guna and Jeannette. It's really a pleasure. And really, thank you for the provocations. I think the report does do some phenomenal provocations for us to think about what are the kind of concerns that higher education has today. And higher education generally does have an existential crisis globally. Not so much a legitimation crisis, but an existential crisis about what the good education really means today. And we have to ask ourselves and go back to the fundamentals of what a good education really means today. And a good education meant that you learn to appreciate all things around you. There was a period where you learned about reading, writing, arithmetic, rhetoric, and all of that. But there came a moment in time we have to ask ourselves where the bifurcation takes place, that we have to become so discipline specific, that a child from the primary all the way to tertiary education that grows up through an educational system where we spend a considerable amount of our lives has to make certain choices through the journey that they undergo. And a good education is supposed to allow you to appreciate the full manifestation of the human condition, hence the humanities with which we are located in. And the sciences were never outside of the humanities. And when did they get outside of that? And these are kinds of concerns that we need to revisit in the 21st century, hence this report. is significant. I often find solace in our Northrop Frye, our literary critic, who often talked about the fact that the educated imagination sees the arts and science as two sides of a coin. And to paraphrase him, and you should really read this very thin, lovely book called The Educated Imagination. He says, I paraphrase, the arts helps you imagine the world, the science helps you achieve it. Mm-hmm. Right? So the fact that the science cannot do without the arts and the arts cannot do without the sciences, that's a fact of life. So as someone who comes from a tradition of just having simple conversations with artists and their multifarious journeys of their thought processes, I learned to appreciate that the fact that the life is not sequential, education is not categorical, and education is not representational, and education is not hypothetical. Right? So when you go through these kinds of processes, this is the way the artist's journey that goes through, takes you through the myriads of paths that you have to go through in life is mirrored in the education we should get. And an artist's education takes you through that meandering environments which you have to go through. But unfortunately, the kind of tertiary education we generally have is stacked against learning outcomes and mapped against a verticality and often or horizontal levels, and like Guna talked about the fact that, the challenge of who assesses and how do you assess. And the question is, assessment themselves become a stumbling block to the journey of the sense of self-discovery. I think the kind of debates that we are having in terms of the future of the world, the complexities of the world, are real, and the world has always been very complex. It's just that we just know a bit too much today. We just have way too much information about the complexities of the world. And by the flicker of technology and social media, the world has already changed overnight. Mm-hmm. And can the education provide you to respond and answer to that? The question is no. But it can definitely build the criticality for you to make sense of what is going on. How do we engage with that perspective? And how can we bring a point of view into the conversation? And I think that's a very important part of the muscular training that the mind has to go through that we seem to have forgotten. So there needs to be a degree of muscularity that needs to re-emerge in the way our thought processes work. And coming from an art school, it's really wonderful because you're surrounded by artists and people will ask you why not, rather than why should I do it, right? And Guna is right, the fact that the art school environment has always been one that has been under siege by the STEM environment. So, that the community gets tightened, builds itself within an enclave, and slowly starts to work through as to why it might not be quick to open itself up. Because the moment it opens up, it starts to get measured. And measurement starts to build or unpack the way you function. But at the same time, the arts is not, or the artist is not close to the sciences in its myriad of forms, but it is part of them because it's part of their journey, the personal journey. And I think that's one of the uniqueness that education doesn't necessarily provide in a classroom. Because the artist's education ultimately is still an individual education. It's the self-journey, right? And the self-journey will take you through that sense of discovery and that kind of inquiry that's much more needed in today's world. And within the environment, and to answer your question in a kind of a long-winded way, what are the kinds of things we're putting in place? We deal with notions of interdisciplinarity and all of that, which is also an important part of ways of thinking about it. But I think we want to emphasize and start to really build what I would deem speculative pedagogies. Mm-hmm. How do we teach people to start to speculate about the worlds when they introduce new ways of thinking? And speculation can become a useful way of seeing the world and framing education outside of the realm of learning outcomes and or Bloom's theories, and all of that. And I think we need to build confidence and courage to be speculative.
Thank you. So So one of the things that we found in the visits that we made to different universities is what they saw as challenges, and I listed some of the challenges about, disciplinary structures, departmental structures, students wanting majors, and sometimes the idea of majors being, well, I'm going to study this to the exclusion of everything else. Do you face similar, these are different colleges, right? Yale-NUS College, the mandate is a liberal arts college where you teach arts and sciences and humanities together. So the students have a kind of a whole menu of options which includes the arts, and which is very different from LaSalle, where it's a what they call a monotechnic, right? They call it monotechnic, where art and design is the primary thing that you teach, and then the other things that the students need, you provide additionally to it as a secondary part of it. Now, what are the challenges that you find in your own institutions, if at all, from students or faculty or the departmental structures that you have? Is there something that poses itself as challenge to the kind of integration that you think it's important to achieve?
We are designed, we actually don't have departments.
Good.
Now
I love that.
Yeah, now I say that, but we do have majors. Yeah. And so we find ourselves,
then
there's
you're
some
cheating
drift.
already.
Yeah, that's what I was going to admit. There can be sometimes a drift.
Yeah,
but we are organized in 3 divisions: humanities, sciences, and social sciences.
Okay.
And we have 14 majors within those.
Oh, wow.
Here's some interesting things. And remember, we've just been designed from scratch. We've just graduated our 3rd class. The MOU was signed in 2011, so we're not even a decade old. But as I said, we built into the college in some of these ways. So we do not have departments. If I walk through, sometimes when I give, you'll have to come and visit. When I give people tours of the campus, I'll sometimes walk them through an office suite, because I have a literature professor sitting next to an environmental scientist, sitting next to a historian, sitting next to an artist.
Great idea.
So, and the idea is, in fact, that we are all talking. So that's the plus, for sure. And again, it was designed that way. Now, having said that, one of the things that you mentioned, and because we're a young institution, we have quite a young faculty. And so people are still, as we think about promotion and tenure, we're still evaluating people within their disciplines. Mm-hmm. And so particularly at those early stages of career, it's harder to probably push across. And again, there's so much more to unpack here, but I'll just say one last thing, and we can dig in wherever you and wherever the audience wants, but just tying back a little bit to Venka, to what you were saying, and I think this brings this conversation across the stage, as it were. We think about integration, and having read the report, we think about integration around training for an individual or for a class or for a community or a school. And so there's somebody or a group of people who are trained in both arts and sciences, as it were, arts, sciences, technology, engineering, math, and so forth. Another thing that we need to do is think about people who are trained maybe more monolithically, but able to work really collaboratively. Right. And I mean really collaboratively, right? Breaking down those silos, so moving from multidisciplinary to interdisciplinary to transdisciplinarity. Mm-hmm. And I think the reality is that we want to be able to promote both, mm-hmm. that it doesn't have to be an either or, but right. an and both.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I think we need to look at where our starting points are, mm-hmm. and find the journey that we want to take in terms of solutioning the kind of education for the new generation of students that we are getting. I do spend quite a bit of time in Southeast Asia talking to a lot of young people around concepts of cultural leadership and what does that mean in an emerging, highly technologically penetrated Southeast Asia. Many a times, and I think this was about a year or slightly a year and a half ago, I was in a conference organized by Yale University students and NUS students, and really about bringing together young people between the ages of 14 to 18 bringing them into a room and thinking through the kind of policy structures that they would like to see implemented in their worlds.
Oh, wow.
All right. It was actually part of a seed funding that came through the Obama administration and, at the Pivot Asia type of principle. And it was really fascinating to listen to what the young people wanted in their education, in their own respective places. They were very much about opening up their minds to the rest of the world because technology is already opening their minds up rapidly. Southeast Asia is one of the world's highly penetrated social media, digital media worlds in terms of production and consumption. And all the young people are not engaging with their antiquated infrastructures and political systems in the region. So they're trying to create a world for themselves. And the kind of education that they are seeking is one that speaks to them from their location. Where is my journey? And what are my immediate needs in terms of my community? And how do I speak to that? And can my education provide that sense of purpose to my location and to my immediate environment? And that's a very interesting way of approaching the educational journey. And how do institutions respond to that? And these are really, it was really delightful to observe kids, 14 and 15, who are into their Instagrams and Snapchats, and yet being able to think through policy very, very vividly and telling the kind of world that I want. And that makes me think about, are we able to provide with the right kind of infrastructure to train that group of students? Are our faculty, our teaching faculty, geared for that? Because one of the key hurdles are our teaching faculty. Not that they are bad people, that they all have been trained within a particular routine, and they are also particular, they are battle scars of fighting for their discipline, and their disciplines have become industries. And the fact that they need to protect the discipline that has become an industry, it has become a self-sustaining machinery, and all of a sudden being punctuated by new expectations. And hence, the fortress hardens even more than being able to open up to the new possibilities that are out there. So the sense of self-discovery needs to start to happen with the faculty. And how do we also bring them? Because whether the disciplines evolve and change or not, the student body has transformed tremendously.
Right.
So the universities and colleges are going to become faster in their irrelevance if they do not respond to the needs of the student body, the emerging student body. Right? And our surveys have also shown, correct, the top number one interest in young people between the ages of, especially Southeast Asia, or between 12 to 18 is travel. Travel is a very, very big thing, right? That survey shows that. They travel digitally and technologically. Yes, they want to be studying medicine, but I also want to work with Doctors Without Borders because it allows me to participate in changing the world that we live in. Or at the same time, they do not draw a line between what is a conflict zone and a post-conflict zone, right? Or ideologies, right? All the ideologies which have also, whether it's a liberal ideology or a unliberal ideology or whatever structure we want to call it, have also informed higher education today. And when you meet with a generation of students who do not subscribe to that, how do we then flip?
Right.
I was going to say, you said something earlier around you can't have both specialist and generalist, or scope and depth.
No,
and
the employers want specialists and generalists.
Yeah, but I think, and it takes time. I mean, I think as a young person, it's hard maybe to have that. But over time, we can do that, and we learn and grow in those ways. These issues of major, the complexity of the world, the challenges that we face. As I look over at you, Venka, I can see, changing course and exploration of our climate crisis. We have climate change. We have the rise of populism. We have war and the crisis of war. We have incredible poverty around the world at the same time where we have incredible wealth. We have this rapid transformation of science, all of these things. And I feel that as you talk about whether it's young people or old people making policy, if it is not evidence informed, then we're really doomed to failure. And so to be able to draw evidence from the arts and sciences writ large to solve the world's most challenging problems, I mean, it's the only way that we and our children and our grandchildren are going to see progress.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that struck me about both your comments is this question of discipline. So what is the place of discipline in this sort of strive towards interdisciplinarity? And we had to continuously, and in the report you would see that we are clarifying that our recommendation and our finding has never been about saying, well, disciplines are dead, we need to destroy them and we need to get rid of them. We think that the interdisciplinarity we strive to and the integration is between disciplines. We want to be very clear about that. We are not looking to these disciplines disappearing. What we want is for those disciplines to become more porous, more accepting of perspectives outside of their discipline, insofar as those different ideas are going to be enabling their students to better engage the real problems. And the way I talk about it is that problems don't come discipline specific. Problems don't come media specific. So why do we think and why do we even expect our students who are trained discipline specific to deal with complex problems, right? We have not set them up for success in many ways. We have not even set them up to engage the problem, for what it is, because they are going to use one lens, and one lens primarily, not because they want to, but that's the only thing that we've equipped them with. So the way to think about it is to, and there are some institutions that have shifted, like some institutions have shifted to problem-centered education. So there are several Finnish universities have started this. They are basically saying, well, there are 5 big issues that we want everyone to know, and students can choose to be between them or just engage just in one. And they could be as basic as water, environment, it would be specific kinds of issues, or urban environments, or urbanity, or whatever. And then the students will learn across different disciplines. So if for example, if it's urbanity or urban formations, they can take architectural courses, they can take courses in civil engineering, they can take courses in urban planning, they can take courses in watershed management, so it will just help them to think about that issue deeply and broadly. Now, do you find that, especially in your institutions, the discipline sometimes gets in the way of them expanding broadly? And when you encounter that, what are some of the tactics that you have used or you have found to be useful in helping navigate this? Because I know that there are quite a number of teachers here in the audience, and this is a real problem for many of them. They are working from a discipline that they are trained in, but they are beholden to make sure that their students are empowered to encounter a world that is far more discipline agnostic than theirs. So they need to create those conditions. So what would you give them as advice, as educators, in thinking about how to get out of that?
It's a challenge we go through. I think a lot of advocacy on the positive side of it. Many a times, I think the best thing that as educators we can give our students is an open mind. Mm-hmm. I think that's the first starting point. Within our own institution, we have tried to break down many of these silos, mm-hmm. And allowed for that freedom. So, for example, we had students who said, I wanted to be a painter, but then by the time they graduated, they were doing things other than painting. Mm-hmm. All right? But if they had remained in a painting program, that's what they would have done.
Yep.
All right? So we allowed for the fact that something that's related to textiles might emerge, something that is much more textual might emerge. That journey is such an important thing that we had to do. We similarly did that in music. because there was the silos of, classical and popular music and jazz. But, while these remain as specialisms to train certain aspects of it, but the journey that the student is put through is really about understanding musicianship, improvisation, composition, and structures, and going through a journey and ultimately creating something different. And it could be something that ultimately leads to a laptop and what the laptop might telematically produce. But the journey is important. So and how do we allow the education to take students through a journey of self-discovery and self-enablement? And I think that's very, very important. But clearly in some aspects there are things that require the discipline-specific completion of things. So for example, we do have a program, a master's program in art therapy, right? And there's a clinical dimension to it. And the clinical world requires certain safety instruments to be put in place. And students have to clear through those dimensions before we can allow them to go out there, all right? And when you go through that process, does that mean that in the art therapy, we're not going to teach them, say, photography or play or clay or digital media? We allow for all of that. But the clinical side, when it comes in, has certain core requirements, because ultimately the client or the patient must have the solace that their safety is important. So there are certain things that we have to negotiate effectively. So we go through that process, and I think it's a challenge when funding institutions and quality assurance institutions continuously look at what is the measure of success of your curriculum and how it applies to people. And when employability becomes the only gauge, then therein lies the challenge with education, right? Because it's no longer about the human being and they are being a contributing member of society, because a contributing member of society will automatically become an employable member of society, right? And that's a natural cause and effect. But when you put that employability at a very early age, and like for example, the artists, the period that some critics have written, from the time they graduate to going to the gallery is much shorter today than 15 years ago, right? Because that 15 years ago, the artists had still the opportunity of practicing and developing their craft and working through it before they were being exposed to the world out there that's engaging with them in a particular form. But today, they're already exposed to the quote-unquote industry while in the classroom, because we are all in a rush to ensure employability. Of course, on some level, I'm also arguing against what I also do every day, which is also looking at how students are better prepared for employability. But I try to take a much broader view about the fact that, are the opportunities appropriately available for the graduate who's going out there? I think it's about creating opportunities. Ultimately, we can't force them to go and take a job, right? Ultimately, we have to create an environment to say these are the opportunities that are available for you to work through those things.
We do a lot, again, as a liberal arts college. We do quite a lot in this arena.
Do you think in liberal arts college you have it all set and ready, and therefore you don't have to work too hard on this?
No.
Pulling your leg.
Of course not.
Because you're already structurally set up to afford these opportunities, right?
For sure.
Whereas a lot of other schools have to work harder.
And that's why I was so excited to be able to be, part of this discussion tonight, and really to be thinking about. Yes, we have a bit of a leg up, and Venka's, LaSalle is an amazing place, and you're talking about, multi or transdisciplinarity across different, not just different medias, but even to the point of art therapy, for instance, as you said, and other and arts management, I know, as well as the many media that you operate in. We, of course, are literally dealing. I say I'm responsible for 130 faculty, ranging from philosophy to theoretical physics. It's a harder job than I thought when I stepped into it. And we start with a common curriculum.
Right.
And it's a series of courses that all of our students take together. So truly a common, we don't have distribution requirements, but a common curriculum.
Right.
And let me tell you the names of these courses, and you'll get a sense of what we do. One is literature humanities. One is philosophy and political thought. One is quantitative reasoning. Another, scientific inquiry. Another, historical immersion. Modern social thought and contemporary social institutions. So by their very structure, again, they are transdisciplinary. And, you know, I love that. I mean, it's really, really exciting to be able to teach. It's challenging because we have different vocabularies and because we are coming from different places.
So who teaches these courses? Like, for example...
Team taught.
Okay, it's all team taught. Okay,
all
that's good.
Team taught. So that we, in fact, can speak to these, you know, to these many things. And I'll just say, because, you know, science art, but let me take the science for a minute. We have quantitative reasoning and scientific inquiry. Those are designed, you know, it's not introduction to biology, chemistry, and physics. It is, what is a hypothesis? How does one measure the immeasurable, you know, the unseeable? How do we test rigorously? What is a theory? How is theory applied? And this issue of being able to ask questions, I think, and to be able to begin to answer them, or to know when we can't or when we need to seek somebody to help us, and to have the methodologies. I think these are the skills of the future. And I know we're probably about to open to the audience, but I just want to give you an example of something I've been brewing for a while. And you mentioned water, and I have this, I have a little bit of a fantasy, and I'm going to say it publicly, so now maybe I'll have to do it. And maybe it's something we can do together on our...
Are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah, I do. I have this vision of doing a symposium, a day-long symposium on water. And I can just tell you, just among our faculty, let alone yours and those from NUS and NTU and the museum and Michigan around the world, just from among our small faculty of 130. I have a literature professor who teaches oceanic literature named Ninka Boer. I have James Jack, a visual artist who does sea-centric art, Southeast Asian art, and really, you know, as you know, draws from these sea-centric communities. Yep. I've got an environmental scientist named Ben Wainwright who studies biological or biodiversity in this South Coral region of plant and animal life deep in the ocean. I have a historian who studies the same region, but he has a book called The Edible Ocean, where he talks about many different stakeholders in the region, including the fish themselves. And, you know, I want to bring them together to talk. Oh, and an urban studies person, or Valentina Zhu, an urban studies scholar, who looks at water and waste. Fantastic. And just there, to then be able to sort of, you know, explore and explode, and, you know, is super exciting. So let's think about how to do that.
So since you announced it already, you're going to have it happen in a year's time, maybe
I don't know, Honor, can we talk about this? Can we think about this?
Launch it here. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So we are opening it up to questions from the audience. I know a lot of the teachers are here. Please ask questions, and even if you're not a teacher. Just
Hi, good evening, speakers. Thank you for a very lively discussion. My name is Ryan. I'm actually a first-year student at Yale-NUS College, and
how's the common curriculum going?
Yes, it's amazing. But I'm just curious because one of the challenges that you mentioned, that Prof. Nadarajan mentioned, is the conventional career ambitions, and that's something that I hear a lot from my friends. There's a sense that the liberal arts education ends at graduation, and after that, it's like we've had fun, and then now it's time to go get a job that's like very hyper specialized and very like rigid and all. So, whose responsibility do you think it is to effect that change? Do you think students should be the ones who are exploring further at the risk of maybe say predictability or like stability? Or maybe industry or employers should be, does the burden of change lie with them? Thank you.
I think that, you know, if you look at any educational system, it looks like it's partly in response to pressures outside, you know, economic forces, economic opportunities, challenges in society. Then you craft up an educational programs in response to it. And partly it's also in response to student demand, right? Students are looking for particular kinds of courses. So certain kinds of courses are going to be more popular among some students because they see certain clear connections between what they study and careers. So what I was referring to there was really the fact that sometimes the career ambitions that students have actually fits neatly into the kinds of departmental offerings. So what they offer is what they think the students want. Now, so part of the change that needs to happen has to be at multiple levels. Students need to become more aware about the range of possibilities. So when I said YouGov, it's a YouGov survey conducted in Singapore early in October, when they've discovered that 50% of graduates, right, are going into jobs that are unrelated to what they studied. Now, so you have to ask yourself, as a liberal arts student, right, so what does that mean for me? Does that mean that I have a 50% chance of, so it means that there's a 50% chance I'm going to do something other than what I studied? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? If you think education is only about the job and the direct connection between what you learned in school and what you are going to do out there, then perhaps you will be disappointed. But if you thought that education, broadly speaking, is for me to prepare, think more broadly, become prepared for a whole range of things, learn to learn, if you think about all of those things, you won't be disappointed. So I think a bit of everything needs to change. That's why I said it needs to be broad changes. It cannot be just the institutions changing and then scratching their head why students are not applying to those programs. You know, so imagine if you just said philosophy and political thought, and that's what's going to be the major, right? How many of you would sign up for it? And why would you sign up for it? Because and where would you go? Would you become a politician? Maybe you would, maybe not. Right, 50% chance that you won't. So the changes need to be broad and they need to be ground up from different sides. But I cannot overstate this, that it also needs to be from the top. You know, there needs to be understanding at a higher level, at the government level, at the level of educational leaders, you know, leadership like you, right, who are in positions of power, where you can actually say, look, you know, there are some things we can do, we should be doing in order to better prepare our students. What can we do, right? And so I would say that it needs to be from multiple levels. It cannot be the responsibility of anyone, but it needs to be broad.
I just want to add like 3 words: scope and depth. And I think that's what we do provide. You know, you start with a common curriculum, you have a major, you end with a culminating experience of a capstone. And I think that, you know, again, it's hard work for faculty and for students, but that's what's going to give you the opportunities, you know, in whatever direction you land. So scope and depth.
Please.
Hi, I'm Shirley. I'm a working professional. I think that what you mentioned, that going forward there's going to be a dramatic and broad changes in education, and I couldn't agree more, especially with that machines coming up, right, aggressively taking some of the, you know, computational works. So my question to you is that I already see certain industries already have this integration between arts, humanity, and technology, especially like gaming, especially like entertainment. Even you look at traditional business like marketing, everything's going to digital, all these things, right? So my question to you is that when you say there's going to be broad changes, what are the major areas? And because when education is very expensive, no matter it's for students when they take up a loan or for parents. So if they take up a subject at year 1, but at the end of year 4, they found that it's not going to be relevant, that's going to be disaster, right? So this probably need to be planned like 2 batches in advance. So where do you see the major change going to happen?
Anyone wants to respond?
Well, there's several ways. I mean, we might not get a perfect answer on this, but there's several ways of actually looking at it. I think one of the the advantages we have with a lot of young learners today, they are very, very agile in terms of with technology. So the whole idea of integration is actually also there's a generational thing that's happening. So today you get people below the age of like 30 who are very agile with technology. So when they go into industries, it becomes almost second nature to invest in, explore how we can actually provide for transformation of the job through technologies and all of that. So it becomes easier as time moves on. But clearly there are going to be game changers where different sectors are also shrinking, in terms of work patterns and all of that. And I think the World Economic Forum has identified some of these things quite effectively, some of the areas that will be shrinking very, very fast, from manufacturing to, even simple things like driving taxis to everything. The job is changing. So we have to ask ourselves what kind of a person will start to engage with it. It's not just about technology. I think sometimes there's a way too much overemphasis on the fear of and implanting the fear of technology in the way the world is changing. I think that fear is primarily created by people of a certain age group. All right. If you just look at technology as a natural means and extension of what is happening, because as humans, we always want to simplify things, make things quicker, make them efficient, and be accessible to as many people as possible. That is part of our human nature. We want to be a sharing community. So you find that technology enables us to do a lot of that very, very effectively. All right, so as humans, we will embrace it very, very effectively. But it clearly has certain implications for certain communities where the whole idea of human might and ability will change. Work patterns will change, time spent with families will change, structures will change, right? So if those are going to be happening, then where is the game changing going to happen, and what kind of education do we provide? I'm actually absolutely thrilled that I think our current generation of students who are in the schools are much better prepared for the world out there, and they've got better opportunities than we had, right? Because we were kind of told this is the pathway you need to go. Today they can create their world. They can create more enterprises in the digital platform or in the physical world. There are a lot more opportunities for people to create. The point is, do we build enough confidence in our education for them to take that step, to go out there? Or, 2 weeks after graduation, you're sitting at home, exploring your possibilities, and the first knock on your bedroom, and your parents are saying, so what are you going to do with your life? All right, do I go and quickly get the first job that I get? Or do I start to explore my possibilities? These are realities that we live in, right? So the sectors will change. A lot more impact that's happening, but I think it's a positive change. It's not necessarily a negative change.
So one quick point about technology. There's an interesting joke in the New Yorker that was published about a month ago, and a guy says to his AI assistant, says, "I love shrimp tempura," and the assistant says, "I don't understand." He says, "What, shrimp tempura?" He says, "No, love." Oh. So I think it's an important lesson there that's there for us to think about. That technology, especially artificial intelligence and all the different technologies that are being introduced now, an increasing awareness is people are feeling is that there is something still important that is human that we need to safeguard. We need to understand is an asset, right? Unlike any other time in history, right? Ironically, the fact that we have more technologies that can replace the human, that's bringing more attention to what exactly is the human, right? Love, imagination, emotions, all those things, our ups, our downs, our anger, all of these things are important assets. And I suspect that, some of the jobs of the future are going to look a lot different and less technological, because a lot of the technological things would be playing in the background, and people who are tapping into the human, you know, guess who, right? People who are in the arts and the humanities, we are going to have a very important role. And I say this with an understanding that yes, the STEM are still going to be very important, but I think that there is a way in which our humanness and those kinds of forms of education and platforms for education that enhances the human, understands the human, expresses the human, is going to be more relevant and not less relevant. Please, Kelvin. The mic is coming to you.
Thank you very much for all the sharing. I'm Kelvin, I'm an architect, and just this morning we're talking amongst my colleagues that we face a problem that our young team members are not talking to each other. So I'm almost 50, they are in their 20s. So something is changing, or something has changed. We're focusing on tertiary education here as to how do we integrate arts and sciences into curriculum to have better outcomes. But we should also be aware that this will only ever be a choice for minority of society, university education. Is there a through flow that we think about? What are we putting into education from 7 to 18 to help people become a more complete human? And I wonder if there is a fundamental difference in how the Anglo-Saxon societies are structuring their education curriculum as compared to non-Anglo-Saxon systems, which Venka used. Southeast Asia, I mean, there are those who used to be colonized by the French, the Dutch, the Americans, etc., etc. Because I have found in my life that, say, my French, my Spanish, my German university friends, they have a very different outlook to the English and American graduates. And I wonder if something we have to think about upstream before university. Your thoughts, please.
I think it's a great point, and I think it brings us back to really looking at systems that work. In this case, that was the word that came to my mind. And so, you know, I think in particular of Northern European nations, right? And when we think about and I'm not a scholar of education, but we think about the very best education systems, particularly, as you say, not even beginning at 7, but even a little younger, right? In the primary days. So what are some of those best systems, looking partially at outcomes, but also at those processes that really make us able to speak across disciplines and to one another. So I think you raise an important point that we look not just at the US or Asia, but that we really say, what are some of these best education systems? What can we learn from all of them? And I would point to, I think, to Northern Europe to say, you know, what is it about not just the kinds of classes and the content. It comes back to this mixture of content and process and expectations, homework and curricular versus, you know, extracurricular activities, or filling up the hours of a day with stuff, with tutoring, with, you know, this and this, versus time for creativity and thinking. And, you know, maybe together we all can be part of thinking about that. I think, you know, thank you, Kelvin, for broadening the discourse in a way, because I think it is important to be thinking about some of these foundational elements well before, because we will not see success in our institutions of higher education if they're already coming in sort of too narrow-minded.
I think just to, I agree with Jeannette, and I think one of the observations I've made in my travels in Southeast Asia, there are two things that operate that are quite unique to this part of the world. The concept of apprenticeship and being mentored still is held quite sacred or quite significant in the way people learn. And it's tied to this notion of also access to education, access to opportunities. But the whole idea of being mentored and being an apprentice to someone is highly valued within family structures, kinship structures, and all of that. And this has kind of led into not only just formal universities and colleges being centers of education, but we're increasingly finding a lot more cultural intermediaries taking on the role of educators. So whether you go to Thailand, Vietnam, or Indonesia, you find a lot more cultural intermediaries trying to provide in some instances, not just primary, but also the tertiary level, a whole set of ideation and research around emerging practices. And this is also spawned off the development or the production of maybe independent researchers. So you are seeing a lot more independent researchers in Southeast Asia. And this is creating a particular kind of flow of people within the region. And that's, again, forming a new level of education that's emerging. So if you go to Indonesia, you get Kunci, all right, who deals with unconventional pedagogies, right? And they invest in unconventional pedagogies, in cultural studies and theories and in all of that. And in order to problematize the institutionalization of pedagogies and move away from that infrastructure. I met a cultural intermediary in Cambodia and was run by an artist, and she says, I love to build infrastructure, but I hate to work in one. Right? But she's primarily an installation artist, because then she deals with infrastructure. Right? But I will allow and build infrastructure that can be taken down in order for the learning to be completed, then you move on. So the whole idea of migration and transition and all of that is still very much imbibed and embodied, no matter how connected digitally people are, no matter how affluent people become. And hence goes back to one of my earlier point of location and locatedness is quite significant in terms of the kinds of education you want to beget. That does not negate the fact that people still aspire to get the kinds of Anglo-Saxon education that has historically been embedded in many people's mindsets. That is that pathway to go, right? Because it was your ticket to redemption of some sort, all right? Out of poverty to a range of things. So we find that we have to now think much more carefully about where learning can actually take place. And you see that there's a lot more opportunities where learning is actually taking place, which is becoming truly exciting.
And there's locatedness, and yet we're so global. And so again, these opportunities to learn from so many places and ideas and through technology, but also through those human connections.
So you raised a very important point about, what they call K-12 education, education that starts from very early prior to higher education. While this report specifically focused on higher education, one of the many recommendations we make and one of the findings we have is also the importance of starting early, because some of the career expectations that you talked about, some of the ways in which certain disciplines are formed and ossified, this has got to do with the fact that from very early we fundamentally start molding the mind of these young people with certain aspirations, certain ideas about what a discipline is, what you study and how you study it. So in addition to looking at other cultural models like Venka was talking about, I think it's very critical, and one of the recommendations we make is that there be a similar kind of study, not necessarily by the National Academies, because that's not their mandate, but a similar kind of study that might be looking at K-12 systems and how that can be transformed, because there is where the disciplines get formed. There is where the particular modes of knowing and thinking and how you can be taught and why you should be taught the way you should becomes solidified, and we need to change that from the beginning so that, so some of you teachers who are here, you're a very important part of the bigger picture. So thank you very much for being here. I'm told that we've just run out of time, and so we need to thank the panelists, Venka, and all of you for being here, Nina and Honor.
Thank you so much, Guna, Jeannette, and Venka, for generously sharing your time with us. If you're interested in turning up next Thursday evening, we're expecting visiting artists, Agent M and Claire B, who are from France, and they'll be here to share about their practice that playfully brings together reality and virtuality through art and technology. We wish to thank all of you for attending today's session. It was really lovely having all of you in the audience. Please join us in thanking the speaker and panelists one last time, and we hope to see you back at Art Science Museum again.